This is another video lecture designed to supplement what we do in class. This is a big week because we're going to be covering the textbook and we're getting finally into some more specific ideas in the text. So Native American creation myth is where we start Monday with the world on Turtle's Back. Over the next week or two, we're going to be looking at the influences of myth on Native American culture and on the cultural perspective of the exploring Europeans. So it's important that we use some common definitions. So the term myth comes from the Greek mythos, M-Y-T-H-O-S. Mythos means story or word. So it is a story designed to explain some aspect of culture of our society. As stories, myths articulate how characters undergo or interact in ordered sequence of events. The term myth has come to refer to a certain genre of stories that share characteristics that make the genre distinctly different, such as legends and folk tales. Many definitions of myth repeat similar general aspects of the genre and may be summarized this way. Here's a definition that you want to write down in your notes. Myths are symbolic tales of the distant past, often primordial times. Primordial, P-R-I-M-O-R-D-I-A-L. Primordial, which means before time, which means before people, when the earth had not yet been formed. These primordial tales concern the universe and the ordering of the universe. And they may be connected to belief systems or rituals and may serve to direct social action and values. Myth is connected to culture, it is connected to beliefs and rituals, and it is used to control social action. That last part of the definition is specifically what we spent time talking about last week with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the idea of social contract, about keeping social control. Other parts of definitions for myth. The classic definition of myth from folklore studies finds clearest delineation in this definition, where myths are defined as tales believed as true, usually sacred, set in the distant past or other worlds or parts of the world, and with extra-human, inhuman, or heroic characters. It's a definition, so I'm going to want you to write it down, so I'll even go over it again. Myths are defined as tales believed as true, usually sacred, set in the distant past or other worlds or parts of the world, and with extra-human, inhuman, or heroic characters. Extra-human, inhuman, or heroic characters can be Raven. It can be God reaching out at the top of the Sistine Chapel to zap man with the creation. Or it could be, very simply, something simpler than that. Something where a character like Raven comes along and orders the universe, where a woman falls through a hole in the sky and falls down into the water world, which then becomes a human place. Myth serves all of these functions. These myths, which kind of explain the beginning of time, they're called cosmogenic or origin myths. Let's go with origin myths. It's a better term than cosmogenic, although cosmogenic is awfully geeky. They function to provide order for the universe. They're symbolic expressions, and they help to establish important values or aspects of a culture's worldview. All the stuff that we've talked about so far. It helps define the universe. They're symbolic in their expression, and they help establish important values and aspects of a culture's worldview. For many people, myths remain value-laden stories that explain much about human nature. This is right up the alley for what we're doing in this class. These stories explain why human functions the way that they do, why they believe in what they do. So there are 5 major characteristics of myth that I want you to be aware of as we go through and talk about myth in this class. Later in the week, I'm going to ask you to find an example of a Native American creation myth or myth that explains the universe and have that prepared for class. It'll certainly help you with your next paper assignment, etc., etc. So the first characteristic of myth is that myths are stories that explain the creation of the universe, either the foundation, origin of the universe, key beings within that universe, though not specifically in terms of a particular culture or region. They just explain that the Earth came about. They're not totally particular to different groups of people. Given the connection to origins, the setting is typically primordial. I think I said this before, but primordial, P-R-I-M-O-R-D-I-A-L. Primordial is what existed before there was order in the universe. So pre-Big Bang Theory. Pre-God reached his hand out and took the great soup of chemicals and made the first amino acid pair. So a primordial universe, beginning of time. And characters are typically proto-human. They look a lot like humans but aren't quite yet. They might be clay figures, they might be raven, they might be any one of those particular kinds of things. Or gods. So the characters are proto-human or gods. Myths also have cosmogenic overtones, even when not fully developed that way. What does that mean? Cosmogenic overtones. Deals with the beginning of certain elements. Deals with the creation of the world, the creation of mountains, the creations of people, the creations of culture. So you got this big fat term called cosmogenic. C-O-S-M-O-G-E-N-I-C. Cosmogenic. But really, what does that mean? It just means the origin. The creation of something from nothing, usually by a higher being. The second characteristic is that myths are narratives of a sacred nature and connect with some sort of ritual. Just like our creation myth in the Bible, where God reached out his hand and ordered the universe. He cast stars out on the first day, and on the seventh day he rested. We're very familiar with how this story works. Myths are narratives of a sacred nature, often connected with some sort of ritual. Myths are often foundational or key narratives associated with religion. These narratives are believed to be true within the associated faith system. We as Christians believe the Bible. Other cultures believe in different levels of organization. I'm sure Islam has a specific way of putting it forth. I'm sure Hinduism has a way of explaining the organization of the universe. I'm not too familiar with those, but I'm certain that there's specific elements to each type of creation myth to help us out. So with any given culture, there may be sacred or secular myths coexisting. A sacred myth, God reached out and created man, made Adam from his rib, or Eve from the rib, I forget which one that was. And they're also secular. You may have a secular one existing at the same time. A perfect example would be Paul Bunyan. So we've got the Bible telling us one thing and Paul Bunyan telling us another. But somewhere in the middle of all that is an attempt by culture to explain what's going on. So our third major characteristic is myths are narratives that reflect social order. Myths reflect social order or values within a culture. What does that mean? That means that the myth itself explains some aspect of social organization. So when you look at your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you look at how we've gone through and we've said that human beings organize what's going on, myths explain culture. Myths explain socially why we function the way that we do. Why do you think your parents tell you about the boogeyman when you're a kid? Keeps you from getting out of your bed because that creature in the closet's going to come and get you. 10 years ago, 2 movies came out called Urban Legends and Urban Legends 2. I don't think they're like several other movies that have come out where there's like an Urban Legends 17, something like that. But they take the stories that are seemingly unexplained in our culture and they try to make it, those movies made them into horror stories. But Urban Legends served that purpose. They went through and they say, okay, if you do A, then B is going to happen. If you stay out too late at night, then you're going to get this fever called Roman fever, and you're going to mysteriously die. And the consequence of being out unchaperoned at night is going to be clear to everybody else. By the way, this happens in Henry James's Daisy Miller, a work that we'll read in the second semester. Number 4, myths are narratives representative of a particular way of understanding nature and organizational thought. Organizational thought. So myths help us to see how everything fits together. This is more particular to why there has to be good and evil in the world at the same time. Certain dualities, D-U-A-L-I-T-I-E-S, dualities. Can't have good without evil. You can't have man without woman. You can't have light without dark. So it's thematic. It's symbolic. It's a way for us to understand our particular universe. Number 5, myths often involve heroic characters. Superhumans, gods, Hercules. We've seen this before. Zeus comes down and all of a sudden the world works in a very specific and fantastic way. We've seen all these things before. These gods, they mediate inherent troubling ideas. So the god comes down and says, this is why you are going to do what it is that you're going to do. In literature, we call this function Deus ex machina. D-E-U-S, Latin for God. Second word is ex, E-X. Machina, third word, M-A-C-H-I-N-A. Deus ex machina, the God in the machine, where the God comes down and solves the problem. Humans can't do it, so gods come down and help us to figure it out. So this helps us to reconcile our problems. It helps us to see our patterns. It does all these things for us. The next major characteristic, and this should be number 6 in your notes, is that myths are narratives that are counterfactual and feathering actors and actions that confound the conventions of routine experience. Actually, I'm just kidding. You don't need number 6. It's not something that I'm going to need you to have. So don't worry about number 6. But I've given you 5. So make sure you have those 5 in your notes and that you understand why myth is so critical to our development of narrative literature. So this is another way for me to go out and talk about supplemental material that's not in your text, to not bore you to death, but help you to flesh out the notes that you do have. So take this lecture, 12 minutes, 56 seconds right now. Use it for your notes and be prepared to have it done and ready to go for Wednesday's class.